Welcome to The Mystery, a series of conversations on the mystery of life as ceremony with Ioana Maria Ilutz of The Gentle Healing Way and Melanie Niederskjöld of Sanctor Cree. Our intention for this podcast is to bring light into dark spaces in these dark times, to sit with the tender places within us as individuals and in the collective. We're bringing our hearts together with the intention to speak into what needs to be addressed. We intend to do it as gently as possible, and along the way you can certainly expect giggles and rants and everything in between. We're striving to bring some common sense into the spirituality world, the murkiness, the confusion, the chaos of it all. And we want to bring the right questions that help promote safety so that people can find the right paths, the right teachers for themselves, and have good guides of what questions to ask when and how. This podcast is intended for people who are in the early days of their spiritual awakening, and equally other walkers on the way alike, whether you've been doing this for a few months or a few years. You are welcome here, and thank you for bringing your heart to this space. So welcome to The Mystery. Our next episode is about to begin.
Welcome to a new episode of Welcome to the Mystery. I'm your host, Ioana Maria Ilutz, and I am here today with Helen Henderson from up north, who is a very special woman that I met about a month ago, and we just clicked instantly. Helen works with women and has a completely no BS approach to work and spirituality, and is a really what we call in Cork a sound person. So welcome, Helen, and thank you so much for accepting my invite.
Well, thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, we actually don't know exactly what we're going to talk about today, so this is going to be a mystery as per our podcast name. But mainly I would like to first kind of ask you, Helen is the other half of Indigenous Ireland, and this is how we connected through the meeting through Woodland League and Indigenous Ireland. And Helen and Lorcan, they have such a beautiful connection to the indigeneity of the Irish people, and to bringing back the Indigenous values and the teachings and also the spirituality, one story at a time and one person at a time and one healing, I suppose, at a time when working with people. So this is one of the reasons why we clicked so well, also because they work so much with decolonizing minds and hearts, and they're doing such a great work here in the north of Ireland, and I think everywhere really, once your work gets around. So my question is, how did you come about to do this work, and what does decolonizing mean to you?
Mm-hmm. Thank you. That's a $1 million question, so it is. And the work has just been evolving over the years. So my background was in youth and community work and in non-formal education. So over the years I've been working, I suppose, very much in Derry, like a quite local context up north, quite parochial as Derry is, and but then started working, I suppose, within peace building, and then that evolved into global education and development education, which then was probably really the start of that process of trying to understand what had happened in the colonial context. And we weren't using that language then, because global education was very broad brush. It was like global citizenship, and we'll all be global citizens and all this type of stuff. But then when you start digging and why are we where we are today, then we started to see the real underlying causes in the colonial story. So we can only hide it for so long, and then it appears, and you're like, okay. So that was probably really where I started learning, and I really started to think about. I was very lucky when I was doing youth work, we took a group of young people to Hawaii, And when we were in Hawaii, I remember hearing the story of the Indigenous peoples in Hawaii and the Indigenous language. And it was like, gosh, that's really, imagine like, it was illegal to speak the language. And, imagine like, the land then was like, nobody had titles that owned the land. It was kind of collectively owned. And imagine that was then taken over. And imagine the military story as well. And I was like, that sounds really familiar. And in this naive way, I was like, started to join the dots. But up until then, I hadn't really made any of those connections, if I was to be totally honest. So that was like these wee aha moments that happened, whenever the penny drops, as we would say. And that was one of them. And the language, I was like, it's illegal to speak your own language, and then of course in Ireland, the penal laws, like it kind of sounded vaguely familiar, and then starting to understand that in the local context, thinking, gosh, like, so that happened here as well, and it was illegal to speak Irish and illegal to practice, faith and all those things. So there was a couple of moments like that, and then over time, I wasn't very satisfied with the global education stuff because it seemed to want to eradicate local culture and didn't really seem to, in our context of being in the north of Ireland, didn't seem to be interested in the context of what had happened here. So it was like, let's just forget about that kind of thing and look at these kind of global justice issues. And then through work, it's funny because Lorcan used to work in global education as well. And then he had started to do some work. He'd been on a visit to the Maori folk in New Zealand and Aotearoa, and they had said, I suppose the response to him being there was like, you can't come here looking at, you can't really come here looking for our culture or our practices. You need to go do your own work, essentially, do your own digging. And I think it's that digging piece is really what we're doing now. We've been digging for a while now, and we're still digging, and it's that kind of digging where you stand. You're as part of the ecosystem, as part of a community, as part of community of humans, but a community of other beings about. And that's, I think, the work of Indigenous Ireland is it's really a collective digging process where we're trying to put those jigsaw pieces together to understand what happened to the people, what happened to the land, what happened to the waters, and then looking at how can we see indigeneity as a responsibility in relationship with the land rather than the sense of entitlement, that indigeneity being about what is our role then and for the future ancestors, and for life-giving restorative ways of being in the world. So that's where we're at. So it's a bit of a long story short, or a short story long. I think you got the long story. So that's where we are today. And it's a lovely collective piece of work where, whilst I would say Lorcan really takes the lead in terms of the Indigenous Ireland piece. He kind of founded it and started it with other people, but it's kind of grown, and we meet. We were gathering every quarter in the nodes of the Celtic calendar. It's slowed down a wee bit now because I think we're sort of composting, trying to kind of compost the learning and see what next, where do we go next with this, and how best to kind of serve that purpose.
Yeah, no, this makes a lot of sense. And it's really interesting how I remember going to Turtle Island and having the same thing told to me by elders over and over and over again, like, oh, you go do your own culture. And I was like, no, you guys don't understand, like, we don't remember. And I remember for my own personal journey, it was through being there in the ceremonies and feeling that true sense of connection and being completely held by a community and the way that, like, people who really knew what they were doing in ceremonies that had been done for so many years, hundreds, maybe thousands of years. And then through that go, that's how it feels like, so that then I could kind of find my way to what it feels like when it's completely authentic here. you know, kind of like tap in the dark kind of a thing. And I remember getting so angry when they would tell me that, because I was like, no, in a way, like for the way I feel things, and how for me, like, ceremonies are just my life, I suppose, and where I feel completely alive and where I feel completely of service. It was like, in a way, like in the Western way, we are privileged because we're, you know, our skin is white, even though in Europe it's not all the same anyway. But we are privileged from that point of view, especially when we live in colonized countries. And then at the same time, on the other hand, I feel like I don't feel privileged because that part of the identity is missing so badly in the Western world.
Yeah.
And I was always feeling like, oh, this is a privilege actually, to be raised with your stories and with your ceremonies and with all of that. And when somebody was coming and telling me, oh, just go do your own thing, I'd be like, well, I would if I had any guidance whatsoever on what I'm doing here. Yeah. And and it's really interesting that you're working with the women, because, you know, like most ancient teachings, it's like the women who are the backbone of the nations and of society. And the way this like male directed way of doing things is very, very different from the way we work, like with the womb, and the way decolonizing our bodies and our minds as women is so different than the male teachings. Would you be okay to speak a little bit into that?
Yeah, well, I think it's been a real learning for me, and I think there's something about women in Ireland as well, and the story of what's happened to women here, but of course women globally as well, and there's a lot of common threads, but it's very different. It's women's bodies. I think there's a story of what has happened to women's bodies is very similar to the story of what has happened to the land and the bodies of water. And so over the years, through the colonized process, and you know, one of the totems actually within Indigenous Ireland is the wolf and the MacTyre, but the female wolf, you know, the story of the wolf in Ireland, it's a story of extinction, but it's a story of fear of wildness. It's a story of kind of domesticity, of, you know, not wanting to kind of tame a kind of wild power and a life-giving power. And I think there's something around maybe women who being feared in an Irish context. So women were the healers. They were the people who, you know, the doulas, the people that would help other women give birth. And I suppose traditional new medicine, modern medicine, took that power away from women. And women were really overly domesticated. They became domestic animals, essentially. And I think that's part of the story that we unfold as women, because what has happened to us, what has happened to women, is different to what has happened to men. It's not to say the men have not been impacted. It's not at all. Like, everybody's impacted by that colonial patriarchal story. So, but I think for women, there's a bodily, because our bodies are life-given, you know, and we are gifted. We have these special bodies, and so it does need special attention. And I think what I find, obviously, in the northern context, we have the more recent conflict. There's obviously a whole story of conflict and invasions over the years, and the famine, but the most recent conflict being within our lifetimes, and then that impacting women's bodies, and the role of women. So, and it's funny because Derry would be seen as, you know, a lot of Derry women would be seen as quite strong women. But what I see in communities, it's definitely the strong woman, and the backbones of the communities are very often the woman with the strong backbone and the soft. I always think the strong backbone and the soft, caring kind of bellies. But their bodies are suffering. You know, they're suffering from mostly autoimmune disease, and women as young as 20 up to whatever, you know, it's intergenerational. And for me, that's kind of the access point this work is through the body then, because, you know, the decolonizing the minds, we can do that in a very conceptual, academic way. And it is important because we need to understand rationally. We have to put the trauma story together. And I always imagine, like, trauma memory, as you probably know, isn't stored in a rational brain. Trauma memory is stored in a very different part of our brain that doesn't recognise chronology or timelines. And it's, I remember a lovely woman who's a counsellor using the analogy of, like, it's like all your pieces of paper sitting like in order on the table, and somebody just grabs them and throws them up in the air, and all the sheets land everywhere, all over the place in different order in a mess. And I think the Irish story, like a lot of stories of, you know, like the story of Romania as well, is a trauma memory. And part of the process of healing is trying to understand what happened. So there's this rational piece of, like, trying to put it in order and think, what actually happened here? How do we find out? And where do we get our information? But then there's embodied kind of spiritual kind of part. And really interesting you saying about that frustration or sense of loss around what happened to our traditional practices, what happened to our teachings, our songs, our, you know, our rituals. And the same thing here, like, you know, part of the colonial project was the tabula rasa, trying to create a clean slate. That's, completely, you know, eradicate the language, eradicate any kind of cultural root. And then it's a bit like the story of the Fomorians and the cutting down the totem tree in Kenmare Bay. For me, it's like cutting down the totem tree was really that attempt to, you know, eradicate everything that was gone before. So there's an embodied, in some ways, the access to what we don't know is through the body, because those memories and stories are in our bodies. You know, our ancestors are in our bodies. So in some ways it's a way back. It's a tool to help us find our way home, along with the language, you know, the Indigenous languages. So that's how I view it, and so it's not that we've lost everything, like, and obviously stories do exist, you know, from the oral storytelling cultures. Very often they were captured by kind of, you know, Christianity captured a lot of stories and Christianized them, or, you know, different in different ways. But I suppose even within the Christian stories, there's still an element of the old story.
Yes.
So they're still valuable. So it's not wanting to throw the baby out with the bathwater.
Exactly. Yeah.
But it is that, and it's, you know, it is that process of, it's complex. It's kind of being okay with the messy sheets on the messy sheets of paper on the floor, because it's messy work in a way, but it's in trying to bring the clarity through that collectively. And that's when we need that collective community, is to kind of repiece our stories and our songs and our practices together. And
it's so this is another thing that I'm very frustrated about in the Western world. I spoke about that in the last podcast episode I did about this connection between spirituality and community, and how I really truly feel the lack of a real sense of community, because also the colonized mindset and the way, like, trauma has dissociated many of us from the truth of the power that we carry within. And then also I find that in a way one of the keys in this process is this work with decolonizing the womb, basically, and the women, because the women, by giving birth, they are the one that pass on. Like, when a child lives in that womb for 9 months, it absorbs all the stories and the blood and the DNA and it is like the way that water is when the baby is inside matters so much, and it can make such a big difference. And it's interesting because I don't have children myself, but everything I do is I do for the children and for the future generations. And this is one of the reasons I've started working with women, because it is through the healing of the women's hearts that everything can become a little bit softer and a little bit more whole. And like I know I think Norwegian, they say healing, the word for healing is helbredelse, I think, if I'm not wrong. And that means becoming whole again. So, and there is one more thing I wanted to speak into as you were talking about the strong Derry women, because we have that thing with, you know, women in Romania like being very strong and opinionated and all of that. And then there is the part with the wars and with the hardships, and especially with communism, like the most recent thing would be the communism, and how sometimes because women had to be strong, they sometimes cut away from that natural softness, nurturing, because had that still been allowed to be alive, they couldn't have survived the trauma. And this part of bringing back the softness and all of that is such an important part of it. So how has your journey been with that particular aspect of it?
It's really important. I think part of that process is understanding that softness isn't valued in our current culture. And I think so when we bring our more feminine sides and our softer front to the table, that is empathetic, that is understanding, that is gentle and flexible, that it isn't always valued. It's seen as a weakness. And so I think even just by understanding that, because what happens is then that's internalized and we think that that's something that's wrong with us. But when we understand that wider value system, then that's really important, because then we see that this is, these sides of us are important. And it's a practice as well. It's a practice of gentleness and kindness, and I think we're in a time of divide and conquer. Divide and conquer has been one of the most effective colonial strategies that has ever worked. And in Ireland, it was a classic, classic strategy. And in the north, and for women, I see so many perspectives. I find it very hard to be mono perspective. So in any given situation, it's partly a strength and a weakness, because you can see all the perspectives, and then that creates a complexity, that it's not right or wrong, it's not good or evil.
It's also very female, because a woman has to have the sort of a perspective to be able to see into so many different aspects of because a woman's way is she'll make sure it's good all across the board
for everybody. And I think, and good for ourselves. I think one of the kind of themes that there's a lovely project called the Women of Ireland project. It's a woman, Belinda Viggers, and she's been interviewing women in Ireland, just collecting stories.
Oh, I follow her on Instagram.
Oh, do you?
Beautiful.
So she was been involved in Indigenous Ireland and came to Jangan and presented. But one of the themes she said that was very clear is that the women here, and probably in many other places, put their needs last. And part of this, and it's actually expected. It's a social. It's part of the social programming. And so then when that happens, what happens to how we treat ourselves, and I think that's something that's really important. The journey to restore women and women's health and women's bodies has to be then women being able to put their, kind of allow their own needs to be in the pot.
Exactly.
If that makes sense.
Yes.
And not to having to kind of sacrifice. There's this whole, like the Irish mother kind of stereotype is like this kind of martyr, the sacrificing your own needs and doing this, and a big caring roles that often aren't a choice, that people being caught between the caring of their children and then the caring of their parents, and wanting to care because it's a real privilege and honour to be able to nurture and care, but then that's part of the woman's bodies being put at the bottom of the pecking order. So I think that my experience of the woman I work with, amazing women who are extremely wise and have lived through a lot, is that they put their bodies are kind of the last on the list, and then they suffer, and I think Jennifer Gauthier from the Menominee people also presented at the gathering last May, and she presented a model of, it was called like, the other woman that was with her, who's an American academic, called it a model of well-being. It's a well-being model, and Jennifer said, well, this is just a Menominee model. This is just what it means to be Menominee. It's not, we don't call it well-being, because if you're Menominee and you're living with your traditional practices and language and food, and then you're well, and so it was really, for me, interesting to think, well, what does that mean here? And what does it mean for wellness, to be healthy and well? Because we can't really do the work that we're doing without health. We can't sustain it. And so obviously, and our health, is so intrinsically connected to the health of our ecosystem. Those things aren't separate, as we know. So I think for me, working with the woman, then the focus on health became really important, because it's our way in, and the decolonizing, like our bodies and minds and hearts and spirits have been so colonized that we can't even see it.
Yes,
we're hyper colonized, and that's why it's good that this is always a collective effort, because we have so many blind spots that we need others to kind of shine a light on. But it also lends itself to thinking, what about the re-indigenization? How do we re-indigenize our bodies, our minds, our spirits and our souls? And the healing comes in that process. That the healing isn't a medical healing, like it's not the drug is not going to fix it. It's not going to address the root cause of whatever's, causing the ill ease that we're experiencing. So the healing, and it's interesting, before Jennifer articulated this, I always felt that about the language. I remember starting to learn a wee bit of Irish, and I remember just feeling like this feels like really restorative, even though I can't explain why. I can't actually say the words of why this feels like it's a healing process. But then whenever Jennifer presented her Menominee model, I was like, which the other lovely woman, Alex Adams, who's an academic, they'd worked alongside, was calling it the well-being model. And you're like, so like there's two different world views of seeing the same thing. And so it then all resonated. I thought, right, here maybe is the pathway back to our bodies and souls and our ancestors,
I really hear you, and thank you. This is beautiful. I can completely relate to that, because in Romania we have books that we study in literature that glorify the self-sacrifice of women. So this is part of our curriculum that kids learn in school. It's something that is so prevalent in the culture, and it's so prevalent in just in the cells of the women there. And another thing that comes to mind is that a teacher and very close friend of mine, like he's a person I really respect, and he's Irish, Ger Lyons. He's from Cork, and one of the things he always says is that your first relationship should be with Creator, your second relationship should be with yourself, and the third relationship is the one with the others. And this is such a wholesome teaching, because if we don't have that connection and true contact within our own bodies and our own needs and understand them, we cannot actually be in full service, and we cannot actually serve the big picture and look across the board. So this is such a like, and many times people don't understand how deep that is. Like you were saying, we're so colonized that we don't even understand how colonized we are. It's almost like I work a lot with survivors of spiritual abuse. So one of the things that I've seen very clearly there, but I think it applies here as well, like it does, like, is this thing where we completely identify with the colonized way of being. Like, we don't know that there is an us aside from that. Many times we don't know that there is an us aside from completely leaving us on the last place, or like letting go of our own needs. We don't, like, it's just like, no, this is just who I am. This is what but it's actually something we've learned, we've done, and it's so many layers. Like, it's the historic, so like the power, the history, colonizing through politics and wars, and then you have the part of the church and of the patriarchy that added to that, and then you have all the other, like, basically anything after the matriarchal societies all over Europe. Like, this has been going on for thousands and thousands of years. And one of the things that I always say, that this is like, we're just planting a seed. Us women who are doing this work, especially in the Western world right now, we're planting a seed. And for myself, I always say it's my prayer that the seed will grow, and maybe 5, 6, 7 generations from now, there will be women who won't have this as part of their, or who at least will see it as a part of who they are.
Yeah, and the balance being restored.
Yes.
And I think that's the kind of, seeing how unbalanced our society is, and the desire for that to be rebalanced with a more feminine approach, and I think women, it takes not just for women, for all of us, it takes a process of unlearning, and unlearning's quite painful.
Yes,
because we've been holding on to what we thought was us, and the right thing, and the right thing to do, and I feel like I've been in a process of unlearning for the last 10 years, and unlearning a lot of things I was taught at school or just socially, and that's the painful part, because it's a stripping away of everything that you thought was real, and that you were the foundations you were standing on. But it also involves the kind of the deepening of our roots, and I think for women that's really when you start to explore ancestry and your own kind of where you came from, and what your ancestors have been through, and what your ancestors have done as well, without turning away from that. It's really, I think it's a courageous thing to do, but it's a difficult thing, and it takes a collective support, because these things, I think we're very often framed, like a lot of the journeys are framed as an individual journey, and the journey is a collective journey, and we find our kind of our companions and our beings along the way, and we find our challenge as well. And that's what's great about, I suppose, Indigenous Ireland. It attracts a lot of challenge as well, because people are really uncomfortable with putting those two words together. And in some ways that's a good thing, because what it does is it opens up the debate of all the things we're afraid to talk about, because we're so afraid to have the conversation, we're so afraid to have the dialogue, especially at this moment in time when things are hot and things are divisive. And it's interesting, because the older work I used to do in peace building becomes more relevant again, because we need to be able to have those conversations, because if we don't, what are the implications if we all stay in our heads with this, with the same things that we always thought, and we're never changing or growing. And I think that's a very feminine approach as well, that you can actually change your mind.
Yes.
You can change your opinion.
Thank God.
And it's not a weakness.
Yes.
And so, but the times that we're in, that's what it requires. It requires us to be in the discomfort of, and I find some of our work really uncomfortable, because I'm like, So I don't know what to think about that. I don't actually understand that. And as women, we're quite open, not always, but
Yeah.
I am usually quite open to admitting I actually don't know that, and can we help? Can we work on that and see how we can understand it better?
We don't have a lot of elders who know these things, or like the way I grew up in Europe, I didn't, until way later in life, like I didn't find any elders who could guide me through. And even now, like I also feel like this, it's like tapping in the dark. It's like that I always say, it's like life is like this game, you know, that game with the cold, hot and warm, like when somebody hides something and then they get out of the room. No, they hide something while somebody's out of the room, they come and then it's like, oh yeah, no, you're warm, it's cold, it's hot. And I feel that this is how this work is like. You just see it, and there is zero guidance. Like there is zero, except for when you tune into your body, you tune into Spirit Creator. And that, for me at least, this has been 98% of the guidance into kind of seeing what, like I only know what is not right. But like having grown up with very little reference points as to what it does mean to be Indigenous, basically, to the land I was born to. Like, it's just tapping in the dark for the most part of it. And I'm very grateful that I have seen a lot of really embodied elders on Turtle Island. And that has completely shifted my life, and it has shifted my view on how I want to age. It has shifted my view on how I want to feel, like, not on the inside, but like how, because those grandmothers will just come and they'll sit on a chair and you can see that they are even though most of them have been through different flavors of hell, of the not easy kind, of the particularly gnarly kind, there is that peace that emanates on the inside. And so for me, seeing that, I was like, oh no, like whenever I'm going to be at that age or at that stage in my life, that's more or less of how I want to be or feel, and at least that has been my only reference point when it comes to that.
Well, that's really important, that the intergenerational piece. And I think I'm very lucky. One of the groups of women I work with, there's quite a big age range, and even within that space, those women they share so much, they support each other. It's a really beautiful thing to watch and observe, and it's and it also reframes for me what education is, because I think often within those spaces, because it's in the creating of the space that is vulnerable and it's open and it's safe, that those things can happen, that people can be truly themselves and trust their bodies and trust their intuition. And one of the main, I suppose, tools that we use is really like learning nature as teacher, which in a very embodied way, so using their felt sense, like using our body is not separate, as you know, and there's not like the inner world and the outer world are not disconnected, you know, and it really sounds really obvious, but the approaches that take us back into our natural environment, you know, sitting in a room isn't always kind of our natural environment, and so then allowing ourselves to be immersed and attuned is, I think, where a lot of the teachings come from, in those spaces. And like we had a really funny experience one day, because I was leaving the house in the morning and there was 2 snails, and the 2 big snails were eating all the lettuce, so we lifted the 2 snails. And then Lorcan says, so why don't you take them in with you to your group? So we took the 2 snails in. and as a group we went outside and we were sitting on a wee bench, and we invite obviously the two snails were then part of the group, you know. And oh, it was so funny because the snails are, you think that they're slow, but between, like, you know, in the middle of a session they've disappeared. I'm like, where did they go? You know, so they're moving, like they're pretty active even though you hardly notice them. But one of the women was really funny. She picked one up and she goes, I heard these are really good, snails are really good for your skin. And she put the snail on her cheek. And I think that's also part of the kind of the approach of working, you know, working with women. I think even when you're working with women who have been through the depths of hell and like unimaginable experiences, somehow joy and play and curiosity find their way into the space, along with the grief and along with the sorrow. And it's not, we can't deny the grief and we can't bypass it.
Yep.
But the joy and the playfulness are always there as well, somehow. And that it's, and I don't know how they can be contained in the same space, but it's just really, it's part of the teaching that the women have taught me, you know. It's like that's how we gather together in joy and playfulness.
A woman's gathering with no giggles.
I know, yes.
There's something deeply wrong there. Right. Giggles or like the proper belly laugh, you know, where your whole body shakes.
I know, and a bit of reverence and irreverence as well.
Of course, and especially really bad, dirty jokes.
That's right. It's a speciality.
Yes, that is always, yeah.
And that's what's so great. The laughter is definitely a key part of it.
Yes, and it's so healing.
It is.
It's so healing.
Yeah.
Like in Romania, we still have that in living memory, where in the villages, women, pretty much all the women, used to gather once a week, usually on the Saturday, and they would either sew together or like prepare the wool, and while doing so they would share stories and songs, and it was like a working half of Saturday working, sharing stories and songs. So we still have that in our living memory. And that is so beautiful and so organic. I guess where I was coming from was that I was missing, again, this spiritual component to it that was kind of outsourced to the church.
Yeah. And
where having that separated from the everyday life, I believe that it created some very strong damage in the exact way woman is relating to herself and to her body and to her needs. Yeah. So for me, that's where I was coming from, because thank God, like, no, I have some amazing women. I remember one circle we had actually in my hometown, and there was this there were 3 generations of women who came. So it was the 84-year-old grandma, and then the daughter, and then the granddaughter. And she almost had brought her daughter, so it almost was 4 generations. And I remember that, and the grandma, she shared such beautiful, she was completely open, she completely got it, even though we were smudging with these weird stuff and we were singing this weird, what probably sounded woo-woo to her songs. She instantly got it, and she instantly got into it, and she brought in this sense of exactly those gatherings that we used to have. So it's I suppose it's also finding our way back to bringing the women together in a way, like, especially in the spiritual world. One thing I have a hard time with is this complete new age BS where everything is love and light and white dresses and flowers on our head, which is complete bypassing many times, and the realness of it and the rawness of it. Because, like, even when somebody shares a really, really hard story, which is horrendous, like, you hear that shared, and there is this openness that happens in the group, and then sometimes you flip it into humor, and then that whole thing is just washed away with laughter and with just being heard. And sometimes it's so simple. you know, as well.
Yeah, and I think what I see with some of the like more modern, I don't know if it's a modern approach to spirituality, but it feels sometimes very inaccessible for a lot of people, because it involves like a certain way of being and maybe a certain amount of money and a kind of look that maybe a lot of people then self-select themselves out of that to think, well, that's not, I don't belong there, or I don't belong there, you know. And I think that's sometimes the danger, is that, not the danger, like people, you know, there's all sorts of approaches to wellness, but I think ones that are approachable to people who are in the thick of it, who are systematically discriminated against, whose nervous systems rarely feel safe in most spaces, I think is a challenge, because those people have been taught they don't belong. Not that they've been taught, they have a felt sense that they don't belong in those spaces, and usually it's maybe because they don't, you know. And I think that's part of the challenge, is that how, you know, this has to be for everybody. You know, we can't, you know, my friend always uses the term well-heeled. So we say, oh, sure, you know, so-and-so's well-heeled. It's a really...
You got to introduce me to so-and-so. I've never seen a well-heeled person.
Well-heeled is probably an Irish term for somebody. It's like, they look, you know, and it maybe comes with I don't know if it comes with a bit of judgment or not, but there's, I think, you know, a lot of people who are being systematically discriminated against and have that type of trauma that comes with that, are often seen to be the problem, you know, or they're in a fight or flight response, because at this moment in time, it's not safe for them to be in another way, and that's when, you know, mindfulness and approaches like that are really effective and really important. But for people who are safety, like just a felt sense of safety is so inaccessible on a daily basis, and how does that work? And I think what I find in that context is that's when nature does the work. That's when the water can do the work that the humans can't, and that's when the solutions are to be found elsewhere. And that for those people, it sort of feels like not a shortcut, but a more immersed kind of environment enables them to be able to access another way of feeling. I don't know if that makes sense. I find it hard to describe, but you know, yeah,
it does. And I feel that it's part of like, these are things that are important to be spoken into. And one of the things that was coming up as you were speaking about this way some women circles are run, and the spiritual woo is, for me, is a symptom of internalized patriarchy, and it's a symptom of internalized colonization, where it becomes so dogmatic and where it becomes so exclusive instead of becoming more inclusive. And that is not the woman's way. The woman's way is to be inclusive and loving and nurturing and accepting of whatever variety. Because when you have children, you don't discriminate against, you know, your kid who has blue eyes or the brown eyes, or who's taller or shorter. Like, it is our innate way as women to be inclusive and loving, and doing or practicing spirituality and practicing circles any other way, to me at least, comes from a deeply colonized way and dogmatic way of being.
Yeah. And I think that's part of the challenge of where we're at, is how can we be inclusive, you know, and what is it we need to learn to be for people to feel safe. And I suppose I've learned certain strategies along the way that the women that I've worked with have taught me, but choice being really important. One of our key rules, not rules, is the law of 2 feet.
Yep.
You can get up and walk out, and you do not have to do anything you don't want to do.
Exactly.
And it's really funny because it sounds really obvious, and they're like, really? Like, and I was like, yeah, really? Like, if obviously if you're, let us know if you're going to leave so we know that you're not upset or,
Yeah.
but you don't have to sit through this. You don't have to sit through something you don't want to sit through. And I learned that off of another amazing woman who we were going into a very difficult meeting together and a very hierarchical meeting. And she said to me before we went in, okay, so if you don't like this, we can just get up and walk out. And I was like, okay. I was like, how many times have I sat there and just took it,
Yeah.
And actually, about 5 minutes into the meeting, we're like, we're just not very comfortable with this, so we're going to go. And we just left. And that was it. And it's really, sometimes it is also the simple things. So that's one of our core kind of foundations is the law of 2 feet.
That's perfect.
And it's lovely because choice, that, you have a choice. And they always, everybody usually chooses then to stay and be there, but at least they know they have a choice and they don't have to sit through, because sometimes we feel like this from whatever, the social programming, that we have to sit there and be good and conform and, so that's a really lovely foundation that we base our sessions on.
And especially for trauma survivors, that's vital because their choice has been stripped away from them sometimes for a whole life.
Yeah, that's right.
And then I always say, in a way, the responsibility also falls back on the facilitator to always reiterate, you don't have to do something you don't want to do. You don't. Yeah. It's such a fine line, and this is where it gets sometimes tricky when we decolonize our mind. And I find this especially important to be spoken about, especially when it comes to women's work and women's circle, because some I'll have clients who come to me who, for example, are completely in a panic for the fact that their moon time, that their menstruation doesn't come on the full moon or on the new moon, because this means this and this means that. And I'm just like, whoa, there are teachings and there is dogma. If it makes you crazy, if it makes you feel less than, it's not from spirit. Yeah. It's not the true teaching. And this, it's true, we have to kind of relearn to make choices and to take the life in our own hands and say, I'm actually not going to sit through this. I'm going to go and have a cup of tea and I'm going to have a lovely chat with my friend, and we're going to do belly laughs and talk about even the weather is better than sitting through something that your soul is not up for.
That's right. And it redefines the role of facilitator. And I think I've been also learning that because I've come full circle. Sometimes I look back at some of the things I've done and I go bright red just thinking about it, when you're younger. But that's all part of the learning.
Yes.
And the facilitator role, I think more now that I'm older, I'm almost 50, and with that brings a gift of
beautiful age.
Kind of it's in some ways there's kind of a consolidation or that happens that you can be more open and honest, and realise the importance of just being really quite open and honest about where you're coming from. And in Northern Ireland we used to always have this in the peace sector. It was we're going to be create a neutral space and be a neutral facilitator. It's it doesn't exist. It doesn't exist. And neutrality in terms of our own, we all come with our perspectives and our baggage and our all that. So it's kind of being okay with that. And it's taken me a long time to be okay with that, but I am okay with it now, and also acknowledge and power. And I think that's really important in circle work as well, is that it's lovely if we can all say, oh, we're all equal and but our world is full of so many inequalities. Yes. That if we can't acknowledge them and where we are at, and often facilitators, we come in as if we're there as a facilitator, then we are holding power. And I think being open about that and also trying to be accountable for that too, and have people you're working with holding you accountable, and that's been a lovely practice in that setting, because generally people are very compassionate and forgiving of you, but inviting that accountability is is also part of, I think, how we redefine that role, because I think that role has been misused as well over time, and the power has been misused, to brainwash people or whatever.
And also the ability to say, I'm a flawed human being. I might make mistakes.
Yeah, that's right.
I will do my best to rectify them when I do.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. And I think that's a lovely approach for the time we're in, because, it feels like we're not allowed to make mistakes anymore.
Yes.
We have to know it all, and we have to be right, and we have to, be right on about everything. And it's like, actually, there's so many things I don't know, and I'll probably never know. So
yeah, and also we do, like, we are tapping in the dark still.
Yeah, that's
we're
right.
still kind of finding our way and going about. Oh, okay. How do we do this? How do we get back to our old practices? How do we get common sense in our circles? How do we meet? And this thing that you said about neutrality is absolutely beautiful, because and some things, like, I have found recently, particularly in Jer Circle, that has been something that has been so beautiful to feel, is the fact that sometimes you should not be neutral. Yeah. Because sometimes if you're neutral, you're on the wrong side of the fence, basically.
That's right. On the side of the oppressor.
Yeah, and as women, but I think as human beings, we have to put the survivors first, and then we think about reparations, then we think about, making it good for the rest. But, like, the survivors' needs and healing should always come first.
Yeah.
And there is no amount of spiritual love and light woo that will convince me otherwise.
Yeah. No, absolutely. And I suppose if their needs are to come first, then those voices need to be prominent and heard.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I'd like to speak about one more thing at least, because you kind of just put it up there, and I find it a very important conversation. You said you're almost 50. I just turned 41 today, actually.
Oh, today! Oh, happy birthday!
Thank you.
Oh, the British on a bitch. Oh, that's amazing. You kept that one quiet.
Oh, yeah. No, birthdays are... I needed
beautiful.
Beach and fire and not many people today. And I just felt like I wanted to do something that's meaningful. So, yeah.
Oh.
And so I wanted to talk about this... the process of kind of like women and aging in society where we don't have a lot of role models on how to age gracefully, or in which even, spiritual teachings or physical, or like the entire industry is geared towards, you have to look like you look when you were in your 20s, or, stay young forever, or God forbid you have wrinkles, or, oh God, your skin is not as elastic as in your 20s. Oh, how did we ever get here? And just the reality of women's bodies and how they change, and the fact that it's very beautiful. And I find it sometimes very frustrating that we have to relearn to age gracefully, or we have to learn on our own to age gracefully. How is your take on that?
Oh, well, I went for a swim the other day, and this is with a friend of mine who's a bit older than me, and we were getting in the water, and we had such a funny time because we were laughing because, there's a certain part of your body when the cold water hits, you can't feel it. And we were laughing because she's shorter than me, and she's like, I'm going to get it first. So we spent a lot of time talking about fannies and boobs, and it was really funny because a bit of it's the aging disgracefully, and she was like, look at the wrinkles in my knees, and I was like, your body's beautiful, it's amazing, and we have so much fun with it, and I think that's where women's bodies are kind of like, there's an element of like playfulness, and we had such good fun getting in the water, but there was a man swimming not that far away, and but we were chatting about it. I was like, I hope he didn't hear that.
It's good that he did.
Yeah. That's right. And it's great, those, like, I think increasingly there's I find a lot of the women, especially your my age, we're kind of getting a bit rebellious about it, you know, and it's kind of like, you know what, like, you know, let's, you know, strip off, let's swim, let's do whatever. And it's a wee bit of kind of reclaiming our bodies, because our bodies have been like almost extracted from in a way. But the reclaiming of it, I think, is should be really fun.
Yes.
And rebellious.
Yes.
And it's also that I remember chatting to another friend, she's saying like our bodies are like so colonized, and like we gotta like manage our like body hair, and it's a bit like a Victorian garden, you know, it all has to be really tidy. And you were like, you know, those bloody Victorians, you know, it's like, let's just throw the whole thing out, you know. It's like, you know. And it's really interesting when you start to compare those things. You're like, yeah, I don't want a body like a Victorian garden. So yeah, it definitely. I'm very lucky because we've got a circle of friends that were quite a range of ages, probably from like late 20s to late 50s. Not a massive age range, but within it we have a really good dose of irreverence. And go back to our Irish, you know, shield the gig, you know, that you think, well, you know, at some point in our history, like, women's bodies were worshipped and revered because of their life-giving properties. And I think the aging part is interesting because I think the hormonal journey, like, I can feel it starting, but I don't fully understand it. But I think there's something around the trusting, you know, kind of also being in that relationship with your body, because the disassociation is huge. From all sorts of things and traumas and intergenerational traumas, and the healing is almost like that, bringing us back into communication, and, you know, in a playful way and in an understanding and kind way. You know, that our bodies are they do so much for us. And it's funny, in our women's groups, every time we meet, we do a bit of a body scan. But it's really what it is, it's a gratitude practice. Yes. For our bodies. And we're like, you know, our legs got us here today. Like, fair play to you legs, you know, good strong muscles on there that, like, they work hard and they get us places. And it's almost like honouring each part of us. It's like, and like, loving it deeply. And I think that's definitely a journey for us as women, because we've been told all these stories about our bodies. But I think the healing comes with other women, but probably also with men. And one of the most healing spaces I think I've been in was a mixed space. Yes. Of women and men together. And it was about 3 years ago, and the men that were in the group were just really wonderful men who were kind of not uncomfortable with some of those kind of conversations or experiences. And in that moment, I felt there was so much healing together. Because I think as women, we tend to gather as women. And men tend to gather as men. And we don't often have those spaces, like a sacred space together. And I felt in that moment, I could see the healing happen. You could feel it happen between men and women. And there's definitely a journey there to be had, because it was another divide and conquer. Yes, and it is another divide and conquer, and you know, as we're all meant to be together as well, you know, and it's honouring all, whatever, you know, honouring everybody that's there and what they bring. And for women's bodies, when that opportunity arises, I think it's really powerful too. And I was lucky to be in that space at that time, which was a circle. And a circle that was just held very sensitively and well. So yeah, and the aging process is, like, I'm sure it's not without its challenges, as things kind of, you know, our bodies become a wee bit different, yeah, and like can do different things. And I find climbing up mountains really emotional. I find I cry a lot if I'm climbing up a hill, because I find it really hard. But for some reason it makes me cry. And as I get older, I gotta cry more going up hills. For whatever that means, I don't know, but it's like, yeah.
I cry all the time, as you've seen throughout this episode. Like, I cry constantly. It's just a way to release.
Yeah.
You know, and I cry when I'm happy. I cry when I'm sad. I cry when I'm touched. I cry when I don't know. One time we were in a big circle on Turtle Island before a ceremony, and we were all sharing, and I was like, oh, I shouldn't cry because I know they're gonna maybe turn, roll their eyes and go, look at that white woman. And sure enough, what came up, like I didn't only cry, I started sobbing, like with, and I was like, I made an idiot out of myself. And then at the end of the circle, this beautiful woman who I'm still in contact with, she's this beautiful Anishinaabe woman from Canada, and she just gave me this big bear hug, and she said, oh sister, thank you for sharing your waters with us. And of course, what did I do? I started crying again. It was so beautiful, and that completely shifted my perspective. And ever since, I've really allowed myself to cry.
Yeah, and I think in our context that's really hard because we don't cry in front of people, or we find, and it's funny because that's the other. We've got the law 2 feet, but the other law is tears are welcome.
Yes.
And so we'll just allow, and if they happen, it's okay. Nobody needs to panic, because I think our instinct is like, oh my God, she's crying.
Fix her.
Fix her. Shut her up. It's like, so allowing the tears is important. It's probably an area I find challenging. And I've cried a lot in the last wee while, but I lost a couple of teeth in my mouth not that long ago, because I wasn't crying. I was trying so hard not to cry that the teeth took it, and then the teeth had to go. And then I realised what I was doing, and it was just from trying so hard not to cry, which isn't good, obviously. But that's, part of our unlearning here.
Yes.
There's a bit of unlearning around that, even though culturally we had our keeners, and keening was a big part of the grief and the expression of grief. But I think part of the colonising process is that kind of stiff upper lip, keep it all together, keep yourself together, keep contained.
It's also a good survival skill. I mean, it's a necessity in times of in hard times, like in times of where it's about yourself and your family surviving. It's a necessity that you have to keep it together.
Yeah, that's right.
And I'm also pretty sure that many of our mothers and grandmothers and great grandmothers would have cried on their own at night.
Yeah.
I really, but because it wasn't so common, we probably just took it as, oh yeah, no, you shouldn't cry. Like for me, crying is it's the way I deal with a lot of emotions and the way I let them flow. And it's not the same for everybody.
Yeah.
But for myself, because I work a lot with the water in many aspects, like it's just fundamental, and I've learned to allow myself to do that. And then people sometimes look at me like, I have actually felt that here in Ireland.
Yeah.
People completely tense
Panic.
up and panic. In Romania, it's more common. Like we cry much more easily, and we're very emotional people. But here I have seen people tense up, and then I always make a pause and say, look, I usually cry about everything. It's okay. You don't need to feel sorry for me. You don't need I'm okay.
Yeah.
This is just how this works. Yeah. And then they sometimes just go,
I can relax.
I don't have to fix her. And she's not broken.
Yeah, it's fascinating, isn't it?
Yeah. But isn't it amazing how with age we kind of just start, like these things, we start letting go.
Yeah.
And we start
accepting
in ourselves. Yeah. And I was just reading this study a while back that was saying that the women's best sex life is after 52 or around the age of 52, because you're so comfortable with your body that you're like okay, this is what I actually this is what's gonna happen. The comfort within our own bodies and their own. I remember my mom, had a bit of a shock when I told her that it's very likely I'm not going to dye my hair and I'm just going to let it grow naturally grey.
Yeah.
And I remember I was like, you're going to have to sit down for this, Mom, just so you know, so that you can prepare yourself within the next 10 years. This is what I would like to do.
Yeah.
And it's like, because especially in Eastern Europe, where like I'm an anomaly for Eastern Europe, like women are culturally very dolled up, like we really take care of each other, of ourselves.
Yeah.
And yeah, I said, no, I'm gonna let them grow grey, and that's it.
Yeah, that's great. But I like, funny in Derry, like when we were younger, we would have taken ages to get ready to go out, and we would have been really dolled up. But in some ways, like, it's funny, and I love short skirts. Mini skirts are like my favourite thing, and I think it's funny. Yeah, part of it as women, that we can just be okay with whatever way we rock up, like a Victorian garden or not, I suppose.
I mean, look, if they don't like it, they shouldn't look.
That's right. I know. So it's all, it's a acceptance, isn't it?
Yeah.
Without judgment, that whatever way we choose.
And I believe it's also a lot to do with our own, also, because another part of kind of the way women's minds are colonized is this sense of competition with other women, which has been, it's kind of just so internalized that we don't even notice many times that we're doing it.
That's right.
And we're entering in this competition, and the instincts, look at your one, you know.
That's right.
You know, the thing, and it's such a long-term process to take that apart.
It is, surely. That's really important. And even just noticing it, you know, you notice it and you think, whoa, the judgment, you know. No, it's fascinating. And our nervous systems are so attuned. They pick up the judgment. Nobody needs to say anything. Our nervous systems are so wired to pick up those things. Just really subtly, you know.
And then how we internalize it and go, I'm not okay. I'm not right. What should I do? Should I do more? What do I have to do to be more and to be better and to be this? And instead of kind of finding our ways into, this is just how I am.
Yeah.
I'm 10 pounds overweight, and this is just where I am right now in my life.
Yeah.
And this is okay.
Yeah, and that be your best self stuff is kind of, you know, exhausting.
It is,
because I reckon I'm never going to be my best self, so I'm kind of accepting that. But you know, it's funny, that's part of the kind of more modern wellness industry.
That's just like
tapping into being, you know, you have to be better, be more, be, you know. And I think it's when people are already doing enough, when you're already enough.
Yeah.
And, you know, and I think taps in. There's like the messaging so subtle, but it just taps into this real
like from the self-help industry, there's a lot of that. But you see a lot of the self-help gurus are men.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying that, like, there are so, like, the woman's way and then the man's way, they're very they can be sometimes very different, and they have beautiful overlaps. And then, like you were saying, we heal when we come together in a safe space. Like I've experienced that a good few times in my life, and it's been so healing to be heard and truly seen by men who are open and sensitive and ready to hear those stories.
Yeah.
Because, like, there's this thing also sometimes that I feel comes up in women where we want to protect the men.
Yeah. Absolutely. And I had an experience very recently facilitating where that happened. And it was really interesting to see, like, I absolutely do it and I can understand why, but really interesting to see that people being really honest about that in a space and saying, why am I actually protecting you from hearing this, when maybe it's good if you can hear it, if you're strong enough to hear it, then hear it. And it's really, and luckily the person was strong enough to hear it, but it's really, everything shifted in that moment. in a way that, again, like, and energetically or whatever between us, everything shifted in that moment. And it's just incredible when that happens. You're like, oh, wow. I was like, party's like, I don't know what just happened there, but it definitely shifted something. And identifying when that happens and how, we do want to protect the men for sure.
And they don't need us protecting them.
No, that's right.
Like I feel it's also part, like, acknowledging just the beauty and strength and the shininess that women have, and kind of like acknowledging them for their beauty and how
and strength and
and also gentleness and like I don't feel I feel very grateful to be a woman. And I feel very grateful. I don't know, like I love being surrounded by, like I love the energy of healthy men,
Yeah, oh, definitely. And it's lovely, actually, one of the things that comes up, because we do use the word patriarchy sometimes in our women's groups, and the woman, you can see they also share really good stories about really good men in their lives.
Yes.
And it's really beautiful to have that in that context, because they understand there is an inequality and there is a backstory, there's a her story and a his story, but them being able to then share examples when they had this really positive male role models in their lives, and also the really restorative relationships they've had with men. And it's beautiful. And there's one woman in particular, and everybody kind of looks to her because her husband, she always brings these beautiful stories about her husband. They're all like, wow, and there's a whole story there, which is for her to tell. But it's just when you hear those examples, I just think there's a healing in that too, and there's a possibility that opens up for people to think, this. It doesn't have to be this way, that there are other ways, and it's just it's lovely.
And a lot of the times, like one thing that is not spoken about enough, I feel, is that patriarchy is detrimental to men as well. It's detrimental to men's health and to men's self-esteem.
Without a doubt.
Like I know in Ireland, I don't know if I'm right or what, but it was like the suicide was 80% men.
Yeah.
That is horrendous. And one thing about what you're saying about this woman sharing the beautiful stories about, I feel that there is so much beauty in sharing. I always say, I've met some amazing men in my life, and I'm very grateful to have in my life men who are beautiful and embodied and healthy, and I'm very grateful that I have those stories. Yeah. I'm very grateful that, and I know that is a true privilege.
Yeah.
I don't take it lightly, but it's one of the things that, in a way, when these stories are spoken about, especially in women's circles, then that also opens the door to that actually being a possibility, because many women live a lifetime not thinking that is actually something that can be real.
That's right. And without the Disney or Hollywood version of it, that it can be real. And I'm rearing 2 boys. Like I have 2 sons, 2 teenage boys.
Beautiful.
And beautiful boys. And of course I want them to grow up, and I want them to be, strong, gorgeous with men in whatever way they are going to be, and emotionally attuned and connected and all that. But it's really important that I don't bring, it's really important not to bring the negative kind of stereotype to those relationships. And of course they'll see me in a certain way as their mother and all that, and there's no shortage of social programming and stuff goes on there. But I just I feel like it's a funny time that we're in terms of those like perceptions, because of social media and all that. But it's also a time that probably means it's more important that we kind of help those young men and boys understand the role of patriarchy in their lives. You know, and there is a better way. You know, there's a better way, and it doesn't mean that it has to be women ruling the earth. You know,
No.
it's but there's a better way that's more balanced. You know,
that we're discovering step by step. I find it very beautiful because you have two sons and Lorcan has two daughters.
Yes.
Like I find this such a beautiful.
Yeah.
I hope, is that okay me saying?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Oh, it's lovely.
So it's a really beautiful thing to watch. So yeah. I wanted to, before we wrap up, is there anything that you really have in your heart that you would like to still share about anything? Like, is anything, if there's anything coming up for you that you would like to share, please have the space and do just that.
No, well, I think I'm curious to learn more, and maybe now is not the space, but I suppose where I feel like I have more learning to do is around the spiritual element. I feel like that's kind of, you know, for us trying to find our own spiritual connection that's relevant to the place we are and the ancestral and cultural kind of lineage, you know what I mean? I think that's probably an area that I'm curious about, but that maybe next steps and Indigenous education, I think that's probably the next step as well for us, is trying to look at how do we actually integrate all this into our education and our love. I don't mean education schools, I mean just, you know, education in a broader sense. So,
well, I guess in this respect, we also don't have to necessarily reinvent the wheel, because there are so many beautiful Indigenous communities around the world that have that. Like I know on Turtle Island, they have a lot of, you know, schools where they teach culture and language and where children are immersed and they go through the rites of passage and all of that. So there are models out there, and I know of a school in Guatemala where they teach everything in the Mayan. Well, they speak Mayan, one of the Mayan dialects there anyway, but they do everything through the culture and through the. So maybe this is one of those things where it's for us to go and seek counsel to other Indigenous communities around the world who have that. And who do that. And and of course we're going to do it in our own ways. Of course we're going to do it, each of our countries and, you know, nations is going to do it according to our, you know, teachings or history or culture. I do believe, however, that it's maybe one of those things where it's important to go to the ones who have that working model.
No, absolutely. And it's just, it's a lovely collective journey to be on. But thank you so much for listening. And all your beautiful insights as well.
Thank you for doing this interview, and I'm really grateful that this worked out. And we were saying that next time we'll have Lorcan on as well. He had to work, so he was off. Thank you so much, Helen, for joining us, and thank you for the work that you're doing and for just being you. I'm very grateful to have met you.
Oh, well, Misha Foster, me too, and Gurmina Magat.
Thank
you so much.
Thank you, and thank you so much for listening in for today and to this beautiful and very special episode of Welcome to the Mystery. I will see you next time, or hear you, or hear each other next time. Okay, love you all.
Thank you for joining another episode of Welcome to the Mystery. If you like what you've heard and you would like to hear more and sit with us, you can find more of our work through the link tree linked below. This has access to our free community gatherings as well as our private one-to-one spaces and wider ceremony work. It's been a privilege and a pleasure to speak and share our thoughts with you today. Thank you for bringing your heart to the space, and we hope to connect with you again soon. Gurb Mila Buekas Live.